Well, Randle, thank you for coming on, man.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
You were introduced as, quote, one of the most interesting people that I've ever met. So that's a glowing compliment.
I'm not sure it's a deserved compliment. But
well, maybe this person hasn't met that many people. But no, they spoke highly of you, and I've listened to some of your content that's out there, and I'm like trying to digest it and understand it. You have obviously a unique job. You have a unique set of skills. You have a unique understanding of the human brain, and kind of how it works, and some strategies for dealing with how it works. So, Will, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of what you do?
what I do professionally is I'm a therapist. Been in the field since 98, licensed since 2002. I work mostly with folks that have extreme circumstances. So, like, the kind of circumstances that basically preclude you from experiencing any kind of connection in society.
Hmm.
So a lot of the folks I work with either experience, like, were used in child pornography, long-term torture survivors, as well as, like, other kinds of, like, more less organized, just how are we for language? Am I allowed to say, like, S-bombs, F-bombs, whatever?
Yeah, go ahead, man. Be
So,
real.
as well as people just
that's your
regular
thing.
old shitty abuse,
Yeah.
like incest, and as well as, like, people have, like, unusual combat experiences. Like, so I've worked with folks who are, like, either Marine Recon or MACV SOG, which were, like, think of it as, like, secret special forces in Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia,
Mhm.
etc. There's that acronym thing I just did. Yeah. That you mentioned earlier, right?
Yeah.
MACV SOG stands for Marine or Military Command Vietnam Studies and Observations Group, which was how the U.S. military at the time basically were able to say, this isn't special forces, while it still was special forces, studies and observations, just on the budget. So most of the folks that I work with have the kind of experiences that are not acknowledged or recognized by any kind of particular society, at least in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And how I work is almost entirely through biology, somatics, with a lot of Buddhism in it.
That's what I heard you say. Biology and Buddhism is kind of your
Yeah.
core focus.
It's how bodies work and how minds work.
Mm.
So it seems that most psychology, especially more like classical psychology, which I never did very well in. I think I only took one psychology class, got a C- in it. Yeah. It largely seemed to be like old white dudes making crap up to feel comfortable about themselves or the world around them.
Just trying to put answers to complicated things.
I don't actually think that's accurate.
Hmm.
I think they were trying to make themselves comfortable.
Hmm.
So a really good example of that could be World War I. So World War I was amazing and astonishing in just the amount of sensory overload and overwhelm that the people fighting it were experiencing. That had not happened before.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the weapons that even we see now were basically developed during and for World War I. And even prior to that, they were mostly just weapons of, like, mass killing that were turned on indigenous people and other nations being colonized.
Yeah, I was in World War I. There was, like, these weird battles where certain armies had, like, like muskets and, like, like
At the beginning,
bayonets, and the other side had machine guns, and it's like, whoa, this is like a weird thing.
Yeah, especially prior to, so what made World War I completely insane, and if you like podcasts, Dan Carlin's.
Yeah, the hardcore history. I don't listen to it, but I know people
so
love
good.
it.
What makes him really interesting to me is he's not so much interested in, like, and General Haig then made this decision to and went up against, like, Folks Command or whatever. Is he's really interested in what was it like to be a human being at that moment, the extremes of human experience. So the Battle of Passchendaele, right? And to call it a battle is weird because we think of a battle as in like D-Day. We landed 2 weeks later, we're off the beach, we're moving.
In and out.
Passchendaele is basically, I think, the first day, I think about 30,000 British soldiers killed in like a couple square miles. And then it just doesn't stop for months.
Mm.
So you have these human beings who don't leave this area. So where do you think those 30,000 bodies go? They don't go anywhere.
Ugh.
They're in the mud. When you're digging a trench, some of that's got hands and feet or faces. The sound of the bombs dropping. In the movies, we see it actually sounded like. So imagine each one of those hits is a bomb, and this doesn't stop for days.
Ugh.
What does that do to your nervous system? But a lot of psychology people at the time, or psychiatry or psychoanalysis, were like, oh, it's coward's heart. They're having a neuroses. Instead of just like, no, any fucking human being in those circumstances would be blown out of the water. These people, the people who suddenly couldn't move or were having, quote unquote, hysterical blindness or basically constant screaming flashbacks. That's just the sane reaction to an insane situation. And by calling out all these diagnoses and all these titles and all these, like they have a neurosis around this, around that, or soldier's heart, it just denies reality that the reality that we created is obscene. We have created a horrific reality, which this is what it's like to be a person. So that's a large part of where I veer off from psychology in general, even like the idea of like diagnoses, the DSM, which a social work student recently told me. She's like, yeah, they're just teaching the DSM as an insurance handbook at this point in time.
What do you mean by that?
So the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders or whatever, you have all these diagnoses in it, right? And when you go see a therapist or a doctor or whatever, they give you a diagnosis. Like, this is what's wrong with you.
Mm-hmm.
Almost none of those diagnoses or numbers in that book account for any kind of etiology. Like, they don't account for like, well, why? It's like if you go to the ER and you're like, I got a rash. They're not like, rash 307.1. That's actually the number for anorexia. Anyway, in the old DSM. But they don't say like, and a rash gets a cream. Well, what the hell is causing the rash? Like, is it scabies? Is it shingles? Is it, I don't know, poison ivy?
Mm-hmm.
Is it an underlying immunological condition like some weird celiacs or something like that? All of those are radically different things. They have radically different causes and thus should have radically different treatments. But the way mental health stuff is treated, they say like, you have these symptoms, we check these boxes, you have this thing, you get this medicine. It doesn't actually account for any kind of source or etiology.
Kind of like, oh, your knee hurts. What do you have? Oh, you have
Knee hurting.
Sore knee.
Right, you have sore knee syndrome.
It's like, wait, why? Like, help me out. Like,
Right. Do you have an infection? Did you fall? Did some dude kick you real hard in that knee like 20 minutes ago? Like
imbalance, immobility, lack
Right.
of strength.
And there's a couple in the DSM that do include like etiology, like PTSD. You have to have a traumatic event.
Mm-hmm.
Any of the addictions or substance abuse disorders, like, okay, that's real obvious. But pretty much everything else is just sort of like these vague, and I know that a lot of people are probably going to disagree with what I'm saying, but like, that's okay. Without understanding why people are experiencing what they're experiencing, there's no real treatment. There's no real meeting the unmet needs that are actually driving this.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense so far?
Yeah. And also, do things change for both the practitioner and the patient when you put a label on it? You have OCD. It's like, okay, I have a label now.
It can. So OCD is actually a really good example,
Yeah.
right? So like I've had people come in.
Obsessive compulsive disorder, right?
Yeah, it's genetic-y,
Okay.
right? So in other words, it's like a neurological glitch. It's been a while since I've studied this, so I'm sure that people may leave comments and be like, wow, you really need to study up on this. People might disagree with it. Again, that's okay. Basically, it's a person has a hyperactive shame circuit. So like there's a part of your nervous system, part of your brain that does shame. Shame has a function. So if we start out with this, even emotions, an emotion is actually a physiological impulse that's both discrete and goal-oriented. That's basically telling you you need to do some stuff. Like the function of fear. I hear a sound in the middle of the night. I wake up. My heart's going. I can say, I'm sure it's just the wind. And I lay back down. What does my fear do? It gets bigger. The fear is telling me, go check it out. So the function of fear is not to run away. The function of fear isn't to flee. It's get more information. So if I go find out, oh, that sound was like a big dude in a weird mask with like a giant baseball bat, now that's going to move me into a different fear, which is, what do I do? Or it might mobilize me into like any of the defensive action tendencies, like those emotions, or I could be like, oh, it is actually just a tree, or it's actually just a squirrel standing on my windowsill, staring at me with an evil look. I don't know. That one would actually be creepy. It's well within the realm of possibility, but still creepy. So shame has a function. And the whole function of shame, weirdly, it originally is social inclusion.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So like, if you got some lady walking through the Pleistocene savannas of America, right? Like way back 15,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago. And her baby starts crying. And she goes, shh, 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 shh. Shame. She's telling the baby, don't cry when we're walking along the savannah like this, or we're going to get eaten by a short-faced bear, or a smilodon, or...
The short-faced bear. Terrifying.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
It's a really... Right,
A lot of people don't know about the short-faced bear. It's like a bear that was kind of built almost like a tiger. It had like long legs. There's some theories that like humans didn't migrate into North America exclusively because the short-faced bear was so dangerous. They were just like, nope. Like they kind of stayed in that Canada region, and they're like, nah.
We're not going south.
For anybody who's just listening, we got pictures of this short-faced bear, and it on its fours, they are showing it's as tall as a full-grown man. So like its face would be level with your face, but the limbs are like crazy long. So like its limbs come up to like this guy's shoulder. Yeah,
right.
and
so it's fast.
They thought that it could run like 40, maybe even like faster than that miles. I mean, bears now are fast.
Yeah,
but I don't know how much like chasing of their prey they do. These seem to be like somewhere between a tiger, a cat, and a bear.
Right, which is terrifying.
Absolutely.
Like, most predators, they're kind of cowards. They're like ambush or teamwork, or bears not.
This was stronger and faster than everything else.
Yeah.
Yeah. Didn't need to like use like surprise like maybe a cat would. Like no, these things are enormous and terrifying.
Yeah,
but
that's a bear that's gonna pick the biggest, like biggest animal, the biggest sloth, or like whatever, and be like you and me. I'm coming for you. I'm gonna eat you.
But it underscores an important point that the system that we have is ancient technology, like our human system.
Right.
Ancient technology operating in a modern world.
Right. So shame, at that point, we can see is highly adaptive, because the human body, we're basically adapted to like live and love and work and survive with like between 20 and 50 people. And then we die. That is not the environment in which we currently live at all. So shame is to help you survive within this unit, within this environment, within your social structure, your family, and the other families around you, in an environment that could be like short bear or short-faced bear hostile, right? Shame now, your family, my family, all fairly different, radically different rules. So what happens when we try to interact in like a larger context, in a larger society, is we're constantly smacking into each other. We're all operating under different rules. And just to finish the OCD tangent, kind of circling back, OCD seems to be when a person has a genetic-y, because saying like, well, it's genetic or not genetic, with some stuff that's pretty accurate. But genes are alive and they're interactive and they're relational, like with each other and with the epigenetics and with the larger environment, blah, blah, blah. Is this person's brain basically makes them feel intense shame randomly.
Just like over the top shame.
Without any discernible cause. So like when I've had to explain it to people's parents, right? Be like, your kid has OCD. They're like, what's the big deal? It's almost funny. Have you not seen TV? OCD is funny. And it's like, well, okay, imagine this. You're driving your car down like High Street. You're having a good day. And then an 8-year-old on a bike pops out from between two parked cars and they go under your car. That feeling you just felt, even just imagining it, because you felt it, I could see it. Like your jaw tightened, like you stopped breathing for a second. Like, imagine if your brain just hands you that horrific feeling for whatever. You don't know why. No one's explaining it to you. You just know you feel awful. And then eventually over the kid's development, that OCD will just sort of focus on certain things in the environment. Like, you're never going to do it right. You're never going to do it right. It's not going to be enough. 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 So whenever this person is taking a certain action or activity, shame. So what's the compulsive behavior? Do nothing. Don't move. But it's not recognized as OCD because they're like, the person's not moving. They have weight gain. This is depression. They get depression medicine. Go and talk about depression. And we see that like their OCD just got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. So when a person comes in and then I'm like, crap, that's OCD that you have. Like, okay. And you can see it in how they move. You can see it in how they organize their body, how they connect and don't connect, because actions are conversation. Actions are relational. And then if we treat it as OCD, you basically have this unwanted thing in your head. We're going to learn to unplug from it. We're going to learn to control our mind in response to it. We're going to learn to control that shame experience and that it's unrelated to your actions. It's just not related to you. There's nothing that you're going to do or not do that's going to make that shame better or worse. Now the person starts to experience some kind of power, some kind of control, the ability to actually influence it. That's treatment. And that's like the really simple things. With that person, getting a diagnosis was actually a relief. They're like, that's what's wrong with me? And I'm like, yeah. They're like, I always thought OCD was a joke because TV. Which, like anorexia, it can be really lethal. So other folks, if you try to give them a diagnosis, a radically different experience. So like one of my people, she's a good person, like really good person. Anyone who lives decades in hell and then still tries to be kind, that person should get a parade every day of their life, in my opinion. So this person survived like torture, being used in commercial child pornography by their parents. It's almost always the parents. For more than 20 years. That's not super unusual. Right. It's kind of mind-boggling if you think about it, but it ain't that unusual. It's just unusual to hear it talked about. They, with actually fairly good reason, decide like, I want to die. I don't want to have these memories anymore. I can't have relationships because that was part of the abuse, is you're not allowed to have relationships. Because if you have relationships, then the abuses will get caught. It'll come out somewhere. So you do all sorts of things to a kid to make sure that they don't talk, they don't share, they don't converse. They're always fake. It's just the kid. They don't have a choice in it. So she wants to die. I ain't going to fault her that. As soon as she gets impatient, they're like, borderline personality, because she wanted to die. Right. Which to me, I'm like, that's batshit crazy. It's just disconnected from reality. And even when I speak to the clinical team at the hospital, they're like, look, we don't want to know her background. We just want to get discharge appointments out of the way. So is it treatment?
Is that kind of part of the modern medical system that they don't really have a great way of dealing with some of these mental health related issues? That one obviously being like probably nothing that those individuals were ever trained for, right? But
It should have been. I mean, I think it's like 70% of, I haven't looked at a study on this since probably like 2003, but 2003, about 70% of people admitted to inpatient units have a direct physical and sexual abuse history. So if you're working in an inpatient unit and 70% of the people are coming in, it's like if you work on a cancer unit, maybe you should have some training in cancer, right? And oncology or whatever. So if you're working anywhere in the mental health field, and I don't even particularly like that term, because most of what I see are just people reacting to reality. They're not really having mental health problems. Some folks, like my person with OCD, that's a mental illness. They got a glitch. Anorexia, I would call that a mental illness because they have a thing in their brain that is telling them, do this thing that'll kill you.
It's dysmorphia, right?
Yeah.
You don't see what other people see.
Right. Yeah. And it really is that it's that literal. Like that person cannot perceive their body accurately. Like you can't fault them for that because there's no choice in the matter. I would say that, yeah, those are mental illnesses by definition of illness. But for someone with, say, dissociative identity disorder, someone with post-traumatic stress disorder, someone, I don't even like those terms, particularly the disorder part, because they're just sane and normal reactions to completely insane and overwhelming and socially isolating experiences.
Someone's mother dies, they become depressed. Is it kind of similar?
Yeah, I wouldn't call that a mental illness.
That's a logical,
yes,
step that happens when you're completely upset and disheartened with the situation.
So let's take that one step further. Someone's mom dies. And let's say that mom was just a real person. Maybe she was a little bit of a shit show. She was also kind of loving. She might have been kind. She might have been highly inconsistent, as people can be. But at the funeral, everyone's like, she was a saint and she was wonderful and we can't ever speak ill of the dead or acknowledge. What's the effect that that has on the person grieving? It's going to begin to wrap up their grief in insulation. They can't express it. If they try to say like, I was so angry at her. Well, she's dead now. Or like, oh, we can't talk about her that way now. She did the best she could.
Or guilt that you didn't ever bring that up with the individual.
Right. And the kind of responses that we as society often have to like grief is kind of like, shut up. Like, put a really nice package on it. Don't react in reality. So most of what I see, quote unquote, mental health arises from like a general denial of reality.
So I'm sure there's 1,000 different ways of treating people, but your biology and Buddhism approach, like what does that functionally look like for someone? Obviously the spectrum of things that you're dealing with individuals is probably wide ranging, but is there a general approach to this treatment that you start with and undergo until you can kind of get to know the person?
That is a large question. So I'm going to try to answer it simply. So the simplification of things seems to be really, really useful because we live in a chaotic shit show world. Like if you look around, the world is incredibly chaotic.
Like we said, we have ancient technology that was not ever developed for TikTok, you know?
Right. Yeah, our brains are not developed for TikTok.
It's developed to get hooked to something like that because it's such a high stimulating, you think? That we're not developed to get hooked on TikTok? I think that product...
TikTok is developed to hook us.
Well, oh yes, certainly.
Yeah, that's what I mean by the other way around.
We were not ready for that.
No. And most of this technology, I think, is actually deliberately engineered.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And that's actually like openly written about. Like when you actually read like tech journals and stuff like that, they're like, how can we capture attention better?
I think it's a book that I read called Hooked. It's like how to build addictive products. And it's not rocket science. I mean, it's pretty much straightforward. They know you have to have a random reward system,
Right.
just like your hunter-gatherer ancestors who were walking around. They didn't know when they were going to find food. Maybe it would be over that next plane. They walk, they get it, and they're like, oh gosh, this is amazing. You get that big dopamine hit. We found the food, and that keeps you moving to the next plane and the next hill and the next mountain. If it was always predictable rewards, like I always know food is on this tree, like you wouldn't really get that dopamine hit. So it's that random
well
reward.
said. Yeah, right. So with therapy, and how do you help folks who are having those kind of experiences? The first,
And sorry to interrupt you, Will, but can you maybe just like talk about some of the different modalities of therapy? I know there's probably like 30 or 50 or 100, but what
there's all sorts.
When I hear therapy, I think my brain goes to like talk therapy.
Yeah.
Me and Will talk about how I'm feeling, right?
Yes, exactly.
Right? I feel sad today, Will.
Yes.
I'm sure that's a component of all therapy, but do you maybe just want to give us a rundown of some of the heavy hitters in the world?
Yeah. So like cognitive behavioral therapy basically says like thoughts create emotions, create behaviors.
Thoughts create emotions, create behavior.
Yeah.
You want to walk me through that just like real simply?
So if I think I'm a jerk,
Okay.
I'm going to now feel a certain feeling.
You're going to feel bummed out.
Yeah. And that feeling is then going to influence my behavior.
You're going to sleep in and not go to work.
Exactly. So by changing your thoughts, that'll change everything else. The problem with that is completely unrelated to how human nervous systems work or are set up.
Okay.
Like the idea that we are rational creatures. I mean, look around. We have enough nuclear weapons to destroy the world how many tens of times over?
Yeah.
How is that a rational use of, frankly, anything?
We just had a stock trader in here, and there was kind of a prevailing theory that the stock market was based on like rational thinking, where like people would like analyze. I think Amazon's a good company, and he's like, it's based on fear and greed. That's it.
It's all emotion.
It's fear and greed.
Right.
That's it.
Idea that we are rational creatures is just utter bullshit and has no basis in any observable reality or history.
Right.
Like, or in even any particular segment of society. So even look at how we vote for politicians. If we were rational, we'd be like, okay, none of this is working. We're not voting for any of these people. They're all out. Like, we're just not voting for anything because this is not working. So why would we keep, like, Senator Kerry, he's not a senator anymore. Now he's cabinet member, right? Or whatever the hell that guy's doing now. So many times of like, this isn't working. This guy's been around for how long?
Mm-hmm.
But we just keep moving the same because it's emotional.
Mm-hmm.
So humans are almost entirely emotional and relational creatures.
That's why we pick the tall, handsome guys.
Yeah,
I
exactly,
mean,
right.
just pick the strong man. That's
Right.
generally like. Do you know the story of? I think the president was Warren G. Harding. He was like, and you can fact check me on this, Steve. Warren G. Harding. They actually have a call. It's called the Warren G. Harding effect. This was somewhere in the 1800s. He was the 29th president of the United States. He was an Ohio guy, but.
Yeah, Old Harding Hospital.
Yeah.
Most haunted place in Columbus is actually the Old Harding Hospital.
1921 through 23. So this was obviously in the time period where you had to like campaign on foot, essentially. And a couple of people were like, hey, you need to like go. They pushed him into this role. And he was just tall and domineering and had a deep voice. And he spoke like this. And they kind of just propped him up. And it led him all the way to the presidency.
Yeah.
And the kind of story is that he was he was just a fool. He was an idiot. He was like a country bumpkin. Yeah, there you go. Thinking errors, the Warren Harding effect. Yeah. So he got elected because he was, there you go. There's a picture of him. Yeah, that guy could be president. They're like, he looked presidential, Yeah. So we fall into these traps of kind of thinking where we don't think about things rationally. Like, hey, I don't care what the guy looks like. Like, I'm just going to hire the best candidate, or I'm going to vote for the best candidate. But you and I both know that that's not what happens.
No.
Attractive people, they get prioritized. Tall people, they get prioritized. Like a significant amount of the CEOs are very tall. They're like 6'1" or 6'2" on the Fortune 500 list. Like, Being tall doesn't make you any better at thinking about business.
No, but how that effect works in human bodies is absolutely the basis for how therapy should work. So most therapies are cognitive and visual.
Okay.
So if we think about a human nervous system, how it perceives the world, it's a bunch of threads of information, data streams, everything from taste, touch, smell, interoception, proprioception, visual, cognitive. Some people even argue spiritual, oral, oral like ears, and so on and so forth. These are all data streams. And then your brain braids selectively these data streams into a single rope and says, you, this is you at this moment.
Mm.
We don't question that. We don't think about that. We just accept this is us. This is the world. Most therapy just focuses on kind of the lightest of those streams. And by light, I mean in terms of weight. So each of those streams, if we think about it, are both developmental, like what develops first. A 3-year-old can't really think exactly. They feel, they make decisions. They're like a sensing, emotional, like feeling sort of like little animal. Thoughts develop a little later on. So when I say in terms of weight, this is a good way to explain it. If we see a giant ass spider on that wall over there, are you afraid of spiders?
I don't like them. I don't think anybody likes them, do they?
So if we actually imagine, it's not just a spider, but it's like a large exotic spider, like a banana spider, like a huntsman spider, some shit like that.
Those camel
so your
spiders,
eyebrows
yeah.
just popped up, your breathing just changed. So even when you were imagining that, right? So your body just had a reaction to even the idea of it. So now imagine you can feel the spider on your arm, like your right arm crawling up your bicep. That has an effect. Now imagine you can feel it inside your nose.
Inside?
Do you notice how your nose wrinkled, your
Yeah.
eyes changed? Your body even just reacted to this idea, much less the reality of it. And then imagine if you're tasting it. So do you notice that all of these different strands of information have weight? Touch, way louder than sight. Taste, louder even than touch. So in therapy, if I'm focusing only on the lightest and easiest of these strands, vision, thought, what about all that other information below that? Doesn't ever really get touched, doesn't really get acknowledged. So if we bring this idea even to like working with the kind of folks that I see, when you have PTSD, you have flashbacks. So PTSD, simple trauma, is you have normal, boom, messed up happens. And now messed up in your nervous system, that memory set can't integrate with everything that came before. Which means it's going to keep repeating. And it doesn't repeat in your thoughts and just in your visual. You might smell it. You might feel it.
Feel it, yeah.
You might feel someone's hand places, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And imagine the intensity of that, right? And then we move all the way into more complex trauma, all the way into like DID, where people don't have normal. There was no normal. The actual act of being abused is the normal. That is the memory system in which they live. So their bodies, through all of these different data streams, are very consistently, if not constantly, experiencing abuse or the avoidance of acknowledging abuse or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Their whole memory systems now are living in a state of overwhelm. So when I'm working with people and they're having a flashback, they might not even like cognitively be aware of it. They just might, and I'm going to be kind of graphic, they may feel pain in their vagina or in their rectum. They may feel hands on their shoulder or in bad places. I will have people who suddenly start shaking because they suddenly are really cold. Because most of the people I work with, cold is a trigger because when you are naked and being abused, you are also cold. Oftentimes, not always. If I'm ignoring all of that stuff, So the really cognitive focused therapy modalities, everything from like even like dialectical behavioral therapy, and I'm trained in all this crap. So it's not like I haven't done any of this. And each of these does have a place. It does have a use.
Mm-hmm.
But given the folks that I work with whose experiences, whose reality is pretty much unacknowledged, and sometimes unacknowledged even by another human being, even a single human being. So imagine if like your mom died and died badly and no one around you recognized that that happened. Totally different animal. Then if your mom died, you have a funeral. People say, I'm so sorry your mom died. Is there anything I can do? I have a casserole.
Mm.
Whatever. If your mom died, and especially died badly, you saw her get shot in front of you, and nothing around you changed. That's more what complex trauma looks like. There's no acknowledgement of reality. For example, if I'm a kid, and that night I get raped by people, they either take me out of my room, maybe they come into my room, and then in the next day, maybe I'm having breakfast with the people who did that. And then I go to school. Without ever being acknowledged that I am a raped kid. Something happened. There's complete denial of reality. My teachers are angry with me because I'm not turning in my homework right, or I spaced out during a test. You begin to see how this compiles. So the beginning of therapy to me is actually the beginning of recognizing reality and then me reacting to reality. So rather than mirroring, where I try to mirror what your body's doing to help you feel comfortable, which is what I was actually taught in grad school, which I'm like, that's weird. Anyway, I'm doing the opposite. I'm going to mirror an appropriate reaction to reality. That to me is the basis of therapy. So, and most people can't come in and just describe, well, hey, all of this stuff happened to me as a kid, and they did this, and they did that, because of said denial of reality. When everyone around you denies reality, especially through childhood, well, so do you. Like, nothing happened. But people tell all of these stories with their bodies. Reflexes and procedural memories don't lie. So I have someone come in. This is a good example. Very first time. And they're like, and this is back in LA. And they sit down. And I sit down. And I don't know if this is on camera or not, but like they do this with their face. Their eyebrows go way up. They get this big, weird smile on their face. Their hands actually shoot way up here. Their hands are actually on their legs. And their feet are pushing them so far back into the couch. And they say, I'm so glad to be here. I know how hard it is to get in. I'm so happy to be here. And I'm like, I'm going to move back about 6 feet, and we're just going to notice what happens to your hands. Like, we're just going to study what happens. There's a lot of tension there. I don't know if you noticed this, but this tightness. So is that cool? And they're like, that's weird, but okay. Like, I'm glad to get in, so whatever you say. I move back 6 feet. Hands are still there. I move back 8 feet. But I'm not moving back from the microphone, you noticed. Yeah. Right. And the hands are starting to drop a little bit. 10 feet, boom. Their whole body relaxes. And I'm like, they're like, oh, that's weird. I'm like, it is weird, isn't it? Let's see what happens if I move 2 feet forward. 2 feet forward, boom, hands come up again. What you're actually seeing is a traumatic reaction. This is a person that was sexually abused throughout their childhood, never acknowledged by anyone. And they're also a woman working in advertising in Los Angeles, which is reputationally a lot of misogyny. Which I mean, like, really, you could say that about most fields. But yeah, so she's the only woman on her team, constantly surrounded by men. They're frequently making all sorts of weird, like, messed up sexual comments. So what's the reflex? You're seeing a disorganized response. She wants to get away. She wants to push away. She wants to run away. She can't. So she looks. But she's like, I was diagnosed with anxiety. What we're just seeing is cause and effect. We're seeing procedural memory and reflexes. So that tells me a story. People don't have reflexes randomly. And here's a Buddhist piece. Nothing's random. Everything's cause and effect. What's the basis of Buddhism? Just cause and effect. Actions have effects. So where did this action come from? And then we begin to pull it apart. We begin to interact with it. We begin changing. But first, I have to react to it as a human being, as a person being affected by it. Because to me, the basis of therapy is deeply, deeply relational. And I don't mean as a lot of schools of therapy teach this like blank wall thing. So if like you ask your therapist, do you like me? I wonder what makes you ask that. Instead of just like an honest fucking reaction. Like I've had people be like, well, do you like me? And I'm like, no. Like you're mean. Like you're mean. Like you judge people badly. Like you scream at your kids. You talk about what a pain in the ass your kids are to you. They interrupted your TV show. So all of these things are unlikable. And then we work with that reaction. You don't say it mean. I'm not saying it judgmentally. I'm just being truthful,
being
transparent.
Yourself.
Yeah, being human. Mm-hmm. Because most of what I see, people are coming to therapy because they really ain't being treated like a human. Mm-hmm. And especially in America, we ain't got a good track record of treating each other as humans, as equals, as people having reality-based experiences.
Yeah, which kind of does raise the question that sort of what we started to talk about previous to this, that the mental health discussion is hotter than ever. You know, this is a boon time for the discussion of mental health. Do you think that is helping the situation?
No, I think it actually makes it worse.
Okay.
Because ultimately, therapy is not an answer. Being treated as a human with reality-based reactions to your actual reality by other humans also experiencing reality and sharing it and connecting with you, that to me would be the solution.
So maybe paint the picture of what you mean by that and what that would look like.
Let's go with an easy one. So the easy example here, almost all of the studies I see based on trauma and combat, or based on trauma, are for people who are in combat. Mm-hmm. Very rarely do you see the same, and you're seeing it more now, but studies based on like child abuse, sexual abuse, yada, yada. Even though that is far more common, way more people get abused as kids than actually serve in a combat role. But if we just stay with combat, it's notorious combat equals PTSD. It's so rare. I'm just making sure I don't go off on a tangent. So those moments of silence are, I'm simplifying. Yeah. How often do we ever ask anyone what happened? What was it like? What was your service? I remember this big Marine. I really liked this dude so much. He was such a great guy. He was having panic attacks because when he was running. So that's why he came in, right? He's like, every time I go running, like I'm having a panic attack. I'm like, bring your sweatpants. We're going to go running because I want to see it.
There you go.
I want to interact with it, right? I don't want to just talk about it. I actually want to see the system in action. And once I saw how he was moving, what it was like from him, I'm like, oh shit, I get your panic attacks. Okay, now we have a place to start working. I want to get the etiology of it. But this guy even said, he's like, so many people say, thank you for your service. Oh, you're a Marine, like Semper Fi, like thank you for your service. He's like, no one's ever fucking said, what was your service? Because what I would tell them is, I hit a kid in the face with the butt of my rifle for climbing onto a water truck because they were thirsty. And I hit him in the face with this. I hit a lot of people, frankly, just keeping them off of this stupid water tanker. That was my service. Is that what you're thanking me for? Like, I went from village to village and just collected information on random people that I don't know and I've never met. I never was going to see again. I don't even speak their fucking language. Mm-hmm. And all I'm mainly doing is scaring them and pissing them off. Is that what you're thanking me for? Like, and he's like, no one ever says, what was your service? What did you do?
Mhm.
What was it like? How did it affect you? Those are conversations we don't have. And I think, especially the more I look around our culture, especially and I don't think we've ever been good at this. And I'm totally not picking on America. I just happen to live in America. I could say like, oh, in Ireland or like in Russia or in Libya or wherever. I've never lived there. So it would be kind of arrogant and kind of dumb for me to be talking about that.
I'm sure soldiers that came back from Nazi Germany had a pretty tough time reintegrating into life.
That's extremely well said, actually, yeah. And we can see that maintained a lot of problems. Right. The lack of integration of people who've had extreme or unusual experiences back into society. We don't do that. To the point where we have to have a debate as a nation about the effects of slavery. Like, the fact that that's a debate is just weird. It's just straight up denial of reality. They're like, oh, like you have like centuries of commercial slavery, like of basically industrial scale slavery. And we have to have a debate about whether or not that has affected people in our society, even like a while later. That's just weird. So the funneling of people into just you and some random person on a screen, and this is going to make you feel better. I'm not necessarily saying it's going to make you feel worse, because any connection is probably much better than none. And if it's not available to you in your environment, and most of my folks, it's not. Like, there is not a single hospital that I'm aware of anywhere in Central Ohio that actually deals with complex traumatic experiences at all. To the point where, like, a partial hospitalization, which is like 8 hours of therapy a day, and then you go home. That I'm not going to say which hospital because I'm not here to like slag on people or whatever, but they actually said, we don't deal with trauma or grief at our program. Right. The look on your face. You're like, it's like a cancer ward saying like, look, we don't really deal with cancer here.
We don't deal with the hard cases, guys.
Yeah, right.
You're on your own.
Right. Which if you need to be in therapy for 8 hours a day, it's probably a hard case. It's probably going to be difficult and deal with really uncomfortable and difficult stuff. And there's stuff like bipolar or schizophrenia or stuff like that has it's like a basis in like, oh, this is a mental illness. This is a genetic-y thing that your body just does, like diabetes or Huntington's or anything like that. Yeah, that's actually a different animal with a lot of overlap. For example, how many people actually ask, what's it like to have schizophrenia? Like, what's it like to try to like walk around town or be around your family, stuff like that with that?
My cousin, he's technically not blood related. It's my mom's adopted sister. Her son's schizophrenic. He's like maybe 5 or 6 years older than me.
What happened to him? What's it like?
Honestly, I don't get a chance to interact with him a lot because he doesn't really like to be around other people. He seems to be good to hang around his immediate family, but it's not like we saw him like a ton as a kid. So I don't think like we were ever that close. You know, not like, oh, this is my cousin, you know, that I used to see every day after school. It wasn't like that. We'd see him a couple times a year. But anytime I do see him, he's just kind of like zoned out. Like, I just think he's so medicated.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you just realize like, oh, this is not who you are. Like you're like half awake kind of right now, which is a bummer, obviously.
Right.
And he's super smart. He was like crazy smart. He worked for cybersecurity. This was like, 10, 12 years ago, before cybersecurity was like a thing. He worked at home. I thought that was the craziest thing in the world. I was like, you work from home? How do they check on you?
Right.
And he worked in downtown Chicago, like for a large cybersecurity firm. And I don't know exactly what happened. I mean, the rumor sort of was that someone, a previous boyfriend of his then girlfriend, like broke into their house and like held them hostage, sort of. We don't really know if that story's true or not. we don't know if that's like maybe the traumatic event that kind of led to like a psychotic break of some sort, or if B, he like made that up. That was like after he kind of had started to have these symptoms, and that was like a manufactured idea. We don't really know the answer to that because he was in Chicago, not close to our family at that point in time. But yeah, unfortunately, our interactions together have become scant, and I think that's, under his preference.
So even that's a really good question. Is like, did this traumatic event happen? How can you tell? So if we come back to the body thing and the recognition of reality, I'm going to use an example. Again, I work with a lot of trafficking folks, like folks who've been trafficked. And just to make sure, like, that's trafficking is a really, 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 really broad term. So most of the folks that I work with were trafficked for commercial child rape purposes. And I hate it when they say like child sex work or like for child sexual trafficking.
It's not work like they had a job.
Right. And it's not sex. When you are 5, you are not having sex with adults. You're being raped by adults. And the fact that we call it child sex trafficking, that's denial of reality.
Yeah.
Right. So coming back to that interaction, recognition of reality. Example might apply to like someone like your cousin. I got this lady in my office and I could tell already she's highly dissociated, like structurally. So in other words, structural dissociation means a person has had to dissociate the same ways from the same things so many times that it's now just nearly instantaneous reflexes in the nervous system. Versus like global dissociation, which is where like, oh, I'm driving and I kind of space out, I sort of depersonalize, or that's like just, it's not a structure in your nervous system. It's just, so this lady comes in, I could tell in the first 1 or 2 sessions, like, oh man, like bad stuff happened. Just the way she moves, the way she talks and doesn't talk, the way she's always like reacting to the door or to sounds or to my movements, and she's tracking me as hard as I'm tracking her. But she keeps popping up to the ceiling, like her eyes do, like over and over again, like basically towards, I don't have one, like the sprinkler.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was, in Hollywood at the time. And her eyes keep popping up to the sprinkler. I ask about it. I'm like, oh man, it seems like some part of you, like, really trying to check something out there. And she's like, no, I'm fine. Keeps happening. So I say it again. She's like, you're going to think I'm crazy. And I was like, probably not. But if I do think you're crazy, I'll tell you. I'd be like, oh, I think that's crazy, and this is why. Like, it's not like a deal breaker or anything. I'm like when someone that I'm working with has anorexia, I'm like, that is crazy. Your anorexia is telling you something patently false. It never learns. It never changes. Like, that nervosa voice is a crazy voice. It's saying if you starve, you'll be happy. It's just not accurate. It's just not based in reality. It's based in. So the lady finally says, and I liked her so much. We ate a lot of donuts together. Anyway, like LA has got really good donuts. That's actually pretty true. She says, I keep thinking I don't even know where this thought comes from, which is interesting. There's a camera in your ceiling. I'm being filmed. And I was like, that's pretty interesting. So I'll tell you what, let's check it out. We're going to get on chairs. We'll take the ceiling apart. So we did. So we get on chairs. We take the tiles apart. We actually examine the sprinkler system. It's just the sprinkler system. If she was psychotic, what would happen?
She'd still believe that there were,
exactly,
have evidence to the contrary.
She burst into tears. And she's like, I was so sure there was, but like there was so much relief in finding out there's not a camera in the ceiling, which tells a different story. And it turns out the story it told was she was being trafficked by her foster mother. And there were cameras in her room. And those cameras, she would get drugged at night. People would come in and they would film snuff pornography. And then they would leave. And then she'd wake up feeling all the bad effects in her body, but someone would be like, you're crazy, or you're this, or you're just tired, or you're all the normal denial shit you see. But that was actual reality. So what we were doing is we were looking at and exploring reality together. So that's a really simple beginning of, oh, that's a nice rainstorm coming down. Anyway, of that's going to be a really weird sentence for people listening to this later, and it's sunny and blue. So, yeah. Anyway, the acknowledgement of even that simple moment of reality has an integrating and healing effect. So the way human nervous systems work, we're meant to work almost like Legos. My nervous system is constantly talking to yours this entire time. Like the same way when I would look to the left, the orientation of you actually orienting to that same direction is kind of automatic. I look over to Steve. Yeah, Steve here. And Steve has a reaction even to my body movement, my body language. Like, and I am reacting constantly to his. It's sort of like this constant game of push hands. This is how we're supposed to work. So to me, that's the basis of therapy. The rest of it is where you get into like a skill set, which the skill set is you help people meet their unmet needs. Like if a person has sadness and they're not allowed to experience comfort, who have never experienced comfort, I'm going to actually both help them be comforted, and this possibly by me, to be able to take it in, to work with like all the stuff that might be around it, the reflexes or defenses or guards, and then to be able to also experience comfort in larger and larger and larger fabrics, environments. Because a human being without comfort is going to be a sick human being. It's just how we work. And then the second technical, and this is Pat Ogden's stuff, by the way. This is not original to me. Complete, incomplete actions. It's like that lady with the hands. Hands keep coming up. The amount of punching, kicking, shoving, both very, very slow, and sometimes like full force, that we did in office, in session. I mean, I work a lot off the couch with folks. I mean, we spent probably about 6 months with just her being able to move her body in response to mine with those frozen actions. If I walk towards her, she'd actually be able to push me back or be able to move out of the way to relax those freezes and turn freezes into mobile volitional actions. So that's a really small example of completing incomplete actions. So like when some dude at work would get right up talking to her, like right in her face, she could be like, yo, like back the fuck up, man. And actually have the option, the fluidity, the mobility to actually put her hand on him and be like, no, like step back. Like you don't need to be that close and get your hand off my shoulder. Like you don't get to touch me, man. Having those options, you have a massive reduction in quote unquote anxiety.
Sounds like everything you do, though, is in person.
I try to. So about half my practice is virtual and half is in person.
Interesting.
I'm still licensed in California. I still see a lot of folks in California. And I also do a lot of consultation with kind of folks all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had to adapt. I greatly prefer in person.
That's why we're here.
Yeah.
So
I appreciate that.
Yeah. But at the same time, all of the, as stated previously, the mental health discussion is enormous in the United States, which is, I think, leading a lot more people to therapy. I think there's no taboo associated with therapy
Not anymore.
Yeah. Or it's at least at the lowest probably that it's ever been. In some ways, actually, I have seen it maybe even swinging like to the other direction where like people are telling me like, you need to get therapy. You have to go get therapy. I'm like, I don't know if I need it. I feel like I'm like pretty happy and healthy. I don't know. But I'm wondering if you see this, you've already said kind of, you're not sure if it's a positive thing, but these companies that are popping up, the BetterHelps of the world and,
What's the function of a corporation?
What do you mean by that?
Organizations have functions.
You mean corporations?
Yeah.
I see.
So like, what's the function of your corporation?
I'd say first and foremost, we want to stay alive as a corporation.
Which staying alive means?
We need to make money.
Exactly. To move resources from place A to place B being my account or the corporate account. So,
Got to stay alive. Yep, definitely.
so when I see profit focused companies, that tells me the organization of the company is going to be based primarily around a profit.
Mhm.
So when we see the shift, and anyone who works in healthcare currently will have observed this shift and will likely be complaining about it.
Yeah.
So the shift from how do we provide patient care to how do we make profit is completely changed how those hospitals organize, how they work, what the nurses, doctors, social workers, clinical partners, whoever are allowed and not allowed to do, what kind of people and treatments they're allowed to offer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because now the organizing principle is profit. So the number of spam emails I get from, say, I'm not going to name names because I have no idea how liability works with this kind of stuff. Whatever, like from BetterHelp or from
That's like pretty much the only one I can name off the top of my head. I'm sure there's a dozen.
there's so many, Caduceus and this and that and that. They're constantly saying like, come and work for us because we are like a therapy company and we do therapy and you are a therapist person. So we will provide you with 40 patients a week and you will get this and this and this. They don't give a crap about my training. They don't actually know anything about the kind of people I work or how I work or whatever. They're just filling slots.
Yeah, it's a scale thing for them at that.
Yeah.
At that point.
When therapy is impersonal, it's not effective.
Mm.
The whole function to me of therapy is you're healing through a relationship. Because human beings are, by our very biological build, relational. I can't outrun a dog. And I'm a relatively fast dude. For 48, I can't outrun most dogs. At least not like a German Shepherd, much less a wolf or a bear or... So how the hell have humans survived for so long? We're supposed to be insanely cooperative. Like the shoes on my feet, I did not meet a single human being involved in their manufacture.
Yeah.
I wasn't even there to see the person who delivered them. Which tells you both, we are insanely cooperative, and our current version of cooperation is insanely disconnected from each other on a personal basis. I have no idea how the people who mined the ore in this coffee cup manufactured it, polished it, put that granular painting on it so it's not super slippery, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know anything about their lives. I don't know how this work affected them or it didn't affect them, how maybe it affected their environment.
Mhm.
Same with like our stupid little phones. I'm not connected to any of the people mining that lithium. So we are both insanely cooperative. And I think we've become disconnected to the point where that is the basis of our demise. And I think it's also the basis of our unhappiness as a society, as a people.
Mm.
For example, therapy is, like you said, so less stigmatized than it's ever been.
Yep.
Having quote unquote mental health problems.
Yep.
So less stigmatized than it's ever been. Even DID, which is like one of those big, like, oh, scary demons, we make weird movies about it, and Billy Milligan and all this other crap, way less stigmatized than it's ever been.
Mm.
And yet, as a society, are we healthier? I don't think so. Like, I don't think any of like the research or like even what people would say, like, are we happier? Not particularly. Because those external conditions, they don't really produce happiness per se. So like when I was in West LA a lot, and we were in West LA because we were living in the hospital at the time, like my kid had cancer and he just basically lived in the hospital. If you are going to live in a hospital, Cedars-Sinai is the shit. They were the best hospital ever. So anyone who's listening to this, everyone who was in room 4013, thank you so much. They were awesome. The nurses, the doctors, everyone there was so legit. They treated us like people, and we treated them like people. The nurses would come and hang out with my wife. Like, she had a really good personal relationship with most of the people there. Like, and I did too, as much as I could when I was working. So, but my point is, I would go to this grocery store, Erewhon, So if you lived in LA, you know Erewhon. If you imagine Whole Foods and then fill it with Kardashian, whatever it is that makes Kardashian, now that's Erewhon. So it is the most expensive, most pure, most cultivated, curated, blah, blah, blah foods that have probably ever existed in any society in the history of human beings. And most of the people in that store were the most beautiful human beings that you would ever see. You would see people who were so astonishing looking. You'd be like, oh my God, like, I can't even imagine what ethnicity you are, but you're just that astonishingly beautiful and fit and in shape and just like the skin is just like, I mean, like people just, and they have so much money. They're wearing pants that are like $3,000 pants, which, I mean, I don't know what $3,000 pants do, but it should be amazing. And it was one of the angriest places I've ever been. And I used to work with perpetrators, and I currently work with torture survivors. Erewhon was still one of the angriest, weirdest places I've ever been. Like people would be lined up in front of the little deli area, staring at each other, arguing over who gets to go next. Everyone's going to eat. Nobody's starving. All of these people are really well fed. So then what's the cause of all the anger? There's no relationship. There's no we're in this together. There's no I see you when you see me. It's each person is in their own little box, their own little bubble, their own little screen even. It doesn't help us. It doesn't make us happier, and it doesn't make us healthier. Spend 8 hours on the internet and tell me if you feel better.
So is that kind of what you see as part of the fundamental issue with our mental health crisis right now, is that people aren't connected? People don't have some of those fundamental things that we had as hunter-gatherers, that connection with society, that purpose, that usefulness, if you will?
I see that at two levels. One, I don't know that that's particularly different than, and I'm just going to speak of our nation because that's where I live,
Right.
than Americans have ever particularly been. So, for example, I don't think there are more gay, queer, trans, etc. folks now than there were, say, like 50 years ago.
I would generally agree.
Yeah. So what happened to all those people 50 years ago, 60 years ago, 70 years ago? What was their happiness like? What was their mental health like? What was their connectivity in society like? You just didn't hear about it because they didn't talk about it, media, transparency, yada, 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 yada. The same with veterans. Like guys coming back from the Pacific, especially like World War II. You didn't have support groups. People weren't even writing about what was it like to be at like Tarawa or, I'm never going to say these names right, Palua or whatever. There weren't even like support groups. The VA didn't have any of that stuff. So you have all of these people who are suffering, affecting their families, affecting their children, affecting their wives, husbands, possibly boyfriends, possibly whatever. We just don't hear about it. So I think what we're seeing is both as our lack of true congruent face time with each other decreases more and more and more and more because we're focused on content. I think that hurts us. But I also think the availability of communication is at an unprecedented, unheard of level in human history. Like, there's this young person I work with, and she's awesome. Like, insanely smart. She's got a brain like a quantum computer. It's so cool to watch work, right? And she does have a really profound trauma history. Like, she was badly sexually abused growing up by a family member. But she's also young. She's in her early 20s. And I'm old. So I don't actually know what a lot of this. I was not raised on the internet. The internet was introduced to me after I was a full adult. And it's just this weird little thing. You're like, oh my God, there's a dude getting slapped in the face with an eel in slow-mo over and over again. That's a great website. That was the internet. Or like try to find music or connect with other bands or whatever. what she describes, she's like, okay, like, so this person, I don't know if they're my friend or not, but this person that I know, like, puts up this TikTok saying, like, I'm having flashbacks and I'm having this and it's awful and I just want to die. So she's like, I said to things and like, dude, like, I can help you. Like, I know what that's like. I know what it's like to have flashbacks and I know what this is like. And she's like, I don't get anything back.
Right.
Like, it's almost like for the likes. Or she's like, I will call this person and they don't actually answer. But I can see her post another TikTok 4 minutes later. So is that person who's doing all the posting communicating? So just looking at the cause and effect with things like that. And at the same time, a lot of the organized abuse folks that I work with, that's the only place they're finding connection currently is. Like there's certain online support groups, which I'm not going to name because trolls. Because for some reason, that's the thing where people are like, let's find people who are really vulnerable and just F with them online because that's what I have to do with my time. Like, right. Anyway, that's just weird. They are actually finding some connection online because it's if I go online and I search, and I do not ever recommend doing this. Do not ever search for this shit. Child pornography support group.
Yeah. Don't type in the first 2 words in your search bar.
Just don't. Right. You're really not going to come up with much. So these folks are finding a sliver, a hair, just a little bit of connection online. And they each say to a person how much kinder and better this would be if we could just see each other.
Mm-hmm.
If we could have dinner together. If this person who's in Montana that I'm talking with, that was also used in a similar, highly organized, because most commercial child pornography that I've seen, and again, I'm niche, so is highly organized. It's extremely deliberate and extremely well practiced. Which means the effects of it are really hard to connect to. The effects of it are really hard to like even acknowledge directly without experiencing all sorts of weird internal stuff. Pain, flashbacks, yada, yada, yada. That's why they call it programming. So like, if every time a kid tries to tell what happened, I torture them in a really specific way, what then happens, and especially if I try to make the kid tell, and then when they do, I torture them in a specific way, is even the impulse of trying to tell, I'm going to have a flashback of that torture. I'm going to feel that same pain, that same overwhelm, the same everything, just with the act of trying to tell. So this person may be in Ohio talking to a person and say, I don't know, Montana, how nice it would be if they could like just have dinner on Saturdays instead of me sitting in my house and you 1,000 miles away sitting in yours. And it's nice to talk on the phone, but how nicer it would be to cook together. I'm afraid to go walk outside because shit gets weird. If you were surveilled for the first 20 years of your life, which a lot of the folks I work with who are child pornography survivors were, their perpetrator's always around, especially since it's usually, at least in part, facilitated by a parent. How are they going to feel just walking around? But if you're with a friend, it's different. So while I am saying like that internet connection is helping some folks, especially folks where they're like, there's no alternative on the ground. Most of the folks I know would actually prefer an alternative on the ground. So there's sort of like 2 layers to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think your average person, the average internet experience, I think, is Instagram, TikTok, posting on Snapchat, trying to get likes, want my friends to see how cool my life is, judging my self-worth based on how cool other people think that my posts are. And I know there's a big dichotomy between men and women. I am interested in hearing your thoughts on the different therapy techniques for men versus women. But I think the average internet experience probably doesn't make people happier. I got off social media like 5 years ago, 6 years ago. We obviously do stuff for the podcast here. I've had more than one guest like, dude, you just got to post more. You got to post more. You got to post more. And I get it. You know, I see you shaking your head. No, no, no. Yeah. Steve's pointing to himself like, dude, yeah. And it's a double-edged sword, right? Because I said this on one of the last podcasts. You know, hypothetically, let's say that you believe in the content that you're putting out. I believe in the content we're putting out. I think that it's helpful. Other people have told me like, hey, look, if you don't put this out, like a grifter is going to come in and put the content out and people are going to listen to that person. And you're genuine, you're helpful, you know what you're talking about. You're not trying to lead people astray. You're not trying to ask them for money, you know, pay for, you know, behind my paywall. If you don't put that content out there, someone will. And they'll be the person who gets the clicks. So really, if you believe in your content, you believe you're helping, the more you put out, the more you're helping. I'm like, it's a compelling argument. I do understand that.
It depends, I guess, on what your intention is. Not to go all Buddhist again, but
please do.
The basis of the effects of your actions is your intention, right? So like, I'm not going to put this on my website. So I think I put one podcast on my website, and in retrospect, I'm like, probably shouldn't have done that. Anyway, I'm just like, oh, I guess that's what you do when you do stuff. I have not done it since. Because if someone is putting out the same content right now that I am, fucking awesome. Great. I'm totally okay with that. And not only okay with that, I wish more people would. I wish more people would be like, let's be human together. Let's actually recognize reality. Yeah. Your reality, my reality, like these intersecting realities together as humans, as people, where we affect each other. If someone's putting out that content, be more kind. How do you be more kind? Okay, here's what kindness is. This is how you do it. Because kindness has a formula. It's specific, it's precise. You have to have clarity over the need, and then you meet the need. For example, if someone is drowning, and I say, I almost drowned once too, it super sucked. Good luck. That's sympathy. That's niceness. But there's no kindness in it. If someone is drowning, and I say like, keep up your strength, here's a hoagie. I've never said the word hoagie out loud. That's actually a super delightful word. Right. That's also not kind. That's just, I'm living in my own weird little bubble. Kindness would be, fuck, that person's drowning. I'm going to get in the water and help them. And if I can't swim well enough, I'm going to scream for people who can. I'm going to throw a rope. I will take direct action. That's kindness. Kindness is you have to have at least the kind of perceptiveness to see the need and make an attempt to meet it. Kindness. So if someone is putting out that same content, I would actually be relieved and wish to high five that person. Because what do I care if it's being monetized or not? Mm-hmm. I just care that people feel better, frankly. So I am not going to put this on my website or any of the other stuff like that, because the whole reason I have a website is so I don't creep people out. Like, given my specialization, I have my picture on the website because it would be creepy not to.
Got to prove you're a real person.
Yes. Yeah. If I'm working with survivors of human trafficking, I'm already like a white cis man. It's already awful for most people to be in a room with just this body. And like, that's through no fault of mine, but I recognize that that's reality. Like that, I don't take that personally. I'm not like, well, not all men. Hashtag not all men. Like, that's a fucking denial of reality. Like, I do work with people who are sexually abused by women, but not many. And I do work with people who are sexually abused by men, a shit ton.
Yep.
So with that, with people saying, but you've got to get yours, I think that's inherent in the problem.
I don't think they necessarily want me to get mine. I think it's just that they worry that someone else is going to go out there and fill that slot, whether it's me or not. Yeah. And I think to your point, yes, like obviously someone else could go out there and put out like be kind content, but either A, there may not be the right person saying it, or B, it's just not out there enough, right? So, yeah. I don't know, it's a battle, because I am with you. I don't like being on social media. I don't think it's healthy. I can feel it like grabbing at me. You know, you're just like, well, I'm gonna open Instagram, see if we got any likes. You know, see if we got. I unfollowed everyone. I follow one account. That's the Downloading Dollars account. That's it. But I'll still get ads, and then I'll still get like, suggested things. You know, so it is difficult. And like I said, I do think we have value to give people, but I would like them to find value in it, but try not to get sucked in yourself. You know, I do have a couple of questions about like kind of what is happening with therapy. I know you said online is interesting. It's maybe not the only thing. It's not the only game in town. It's not a solution totally for everyone's problems. But what about medication? You know, what do you see in the world of medication? I think there's a lot of people in the United States who are on antidepressants. I meet a lot of them. People on various different things, Zoloft and this and that and the third. I have never experienced the medication or a desire or feel a need to take any medication. I think I'm like you, man. I'm pretty holistic. Like I don't even drink soda, you know.
Right.
I try to take my shoes off, get in the grass, you know, get sunshine, sunlight. I don't take a lot of medication across the board. Specifically unnecessarily, but you know, where does the medication thing fall? Because I think a lot of people are saying, I feel bummed out, let me take a pill. Like, let me see if this will fix things.
I think it just depends, which is probably a good answer for almost anything.
Right. The answer is almost always in the middle.
It always depends on the cause and effect of it. So in general, especially with psychotropic medication.
And what do you mean by that?
Medication for like mental health.
It'll change your mind state?
Yeah. Right. Change your mental state. And when people say like, oh, like, you know, your mental state, saying the brain-body connection is like weird. It's like saying there's a liver-body connection, you know? It's the same thing.
Just an organ.
Yes. It's just an organ. There is not a brain-body connection. There's just your body.
I don't think much about my liver. You know,
no, but
when I'm drinking alcohol, I hope it's working.
Right. But you probably, and most people are the same way with their brain. How many people actually know what the hell goes on with their brain? Very, very few.
No, it's the old joke. Like, you don't know what's going on in your brain. You don't know how to change the time on your microwave.
Yeah. Right. The same way, like, why does my brain want to look at TikTok? What pulls my attention where very few people like even just study that in their own organization of experience. So with medication, in general, medication is researched and developed by for-profit companies.
Right.
And we've seen this massive swing into the corporatization of almost every single field in the United States, including academia, including healthcare. And we can see the cause and effect of that. It doesn't really go anywhere good because it changes the entire organizing principle of that particular institution.
Yeah.
So like, with the for-profit research with universities, rather than like just trying to learn or study or like, how the hell does stuff work? They're like, how can we make money from this? And that's going to have a pretty profound influence on what projects get selected, what gets funded, what doesn't get funded, what gets looked at, what doesn't get looked at. Most of these medications do not seem to be particularly targeted toward an etiological experience. They don't consider what's causing it. They're just like, it seems to do something to some people. And the fact that most of the research supporting whether or not a medication is efficacious isn't really open to public consumption.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I mean, not to use like the really big, dumb, obvious, like whole Sackler thing, but like, how much of that research just got like squished because it's for profit? Not particularly different in the mental health field.
Yeah, what I've found to be a interesting revelation is that the pharma companies, they do these whatever trials. Sometimes the sample size is large, sometimes it isn't. And then they don't publish the raw data to peer review. What they'll publish is their synopsis of the data. So let's say it was 50% effective or it was 100% effective on treatment of X. And I go, oh, that sounds really good. That's the only information that I have. I have the information that it was 100% effective. Okay, well, the sample was 1 versus 2. It's like, Oh,
Yeah.
hold on.
Right. And also, what are we defining as effective? So, like, and I'm going to jump a little bit over the medication, but it's the same, just a little more extreme. The use of ECT, which is still actually not particularly uncommon.
What is it?
Electroconvulsive therapy.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I've heard about it,
Oh,
but
yeah.
I don't really know much about it.
Oh, I mean, there's multiple hospitals just in Columbus that do that.
So what? They're gonna give you an electrical shock to do what?
Series of electrical shocks to make you feel better, to alleviate your treatment-resistant depression or your blah, 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 blah.
What's the idea? It's supposed to like change your brain chemistry or like
That's
what?
the idea. And of course, being electrocuted in your brain does definitely change your brain. So right now, I'm counting, 3 or 4 people that went through ECT because they had quote unquote treatment resistant depression. They were suicidal it was not responsive to quote unquote traditional therapy. At no point in time was their reality actually acknowledged. Each one of these people was a survivor of fairly profound childhood sexual abuse, and in a couple cases, torture. So when I'm saying torture, I'm being precise. I'm not being hyperbolic. Torture is where the torturers are introducing complete sensory overload to have an effect on the person's system, an effect on the person's brain. Like in regular old shitty abuse, the perpetrator just doesn't give a crap how it affects the victim. They're just like, I'm just going to do stuff. Torture, they're very deliberate about how this is going to affect the victim because that's the whole point of torture. We're trying to affect this person a certain way.
Trying to sort of
Right.
What's the word that I'm looking for? Just force them into a pattern of thinking. Program.
Yeah.
It's like you do this for a living.
Yeah, right, almost. Right. So, like, each one of these people that I'm thinking of, 3 of the 4, like, they were literally programmed. And I don't mean like, the satanic panic or like, no, this is just, it's about money and horror and obscenity and gratification of abusers. None of that was even assessed. It wasn't even asked about. Like, even like really, really simple things. And these are hospitals here in Columbus that like, no one even really got into it. One person, they're like, it appears that there was a sexual abuse history. That's it. That's so vague. That's like saying somebody had a combat history. You don't know what the fuck that really means. Like, what did they see? What did they feel? What was done to them? How long did it last? Someone who had a combat experience in Afghanistan might be really different than someone who had a combat experience at Verdun. Might be really different than someone who's having a combat experience in the Congo right now. These are all radically different. So a person who grew up and was used as a child soldier in the Congo, their quote unquote combat experience is going to be really fucking different than a US Marine.
Right.
So at no point in time was any of that assessed, asked about, looked at, or even questioned. It sort of just jumped over. So they just like, oh, they just have depression. Having those life experiences done to you by your family, which means you now have no connection with your family. But if everyone's always talking about how great your dad is, he's the dude who tortured you, what do you think that does to you on a daily basis? Every time you get on Facebook, oh, we love him so much. What does that do to your nervous system? You see your roommate, and your roommate's like, what's wrong with you? Like, why are you look all weird and stuff like that, but you can't explain it. You can't say anything. What does that do to a nervous system? It's pretty goddamn depressing. So when they apply ECT, they're like, well, the ECT is effective because the person's not suicidal anymore. They also really couldn't think straight. They couldn't really move around much. They could do like basic, simple functions at like work or at home, but they couldn't have relationships with people. Like, it was extremely difficult in that state. So were they better? So the definition of better is what I really question with the use of medication. Like what you're saying with your cousin. Here's a guy who had, by your description, a really viable brain.
Oh, yeah.
And what does he get to do with it now? But he's better. So with medication, I've often seen it do far more harm and create symptoms than not. And with other people, I've actually seen it, especially when it's been targeted, when the prescriber and the therapist and people either like with group, and we're all having a conversation with each other and the patient as equals. Not as in the patient is this weird person who's not part of the team. Patient's totally part of the fucking team because who knows better than they are what's going on in their system? So when we're all talking to each other, and I'm like talking to the psychiatrist, and I'm like, we're about to do some memory work, which is with this kind of stuff gnarly. And I can maybe even suggest like, can we use low dose naltrexone to inhibit that dissociative reflex? But just PRN means like as needed on the days where we're doing the memory work. And the psychiatrist is like, yeah, let's talk about that. And let's even like set up a little bit of a safety net if they want to, because doing memory work and like really, you got to feel good for a day or two after we do that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That I've seen actually be really effective. We're all in conversation with each other. We're all looking at the same thing at the same time, including the patient. That actually works really well, and I rarely see that happen. And in my interactions with healthcare system, California, Ohio, whichever, I got to fight like crazy to try and even get a little bit of that going. And that has changed a lot in the last 20 years. 20 years ago, it was a lot more normal. Like when I worked at Mount Carmel Health System, we had a partial program specialized with trauma. When I worked for the Center for Eating Disorders, is sort of like the trauma person there. Highly collaborative. That was great. The amount of people I've probably pissed off trying to collaborate and create collaboration, and then I get mad and say things that alienate them. Like, I called the psychiatrist Count Chocula. And he's like, what does that even mean? I'm like, it means you're high on advertising and low on nutritional content.
Oh.
Yeah. And he was like, I think this conversation is done. I was like, dude, this conversation ended 6 minutes ago. I just been waiting to say that, frankly. So yeah, we're probably not going to work together again.
Right. But it sounds like not the type of person that is going to be helpful for what you're trying to accomplish anyways.
Yeah, because they were more interested in, profit. And I do think there are ways to balance like profit, like actually making money and supporting yourself, like within reason.
Yeah.
And actually being a human with other humans.
I'm a big believer in you can do good and do well.
Yeah.
I think that one of the things I've heard recently, and I went, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense, is you have to understand there's a big difference between a company and a corporation. Like, we have a company here.
That's well said.
But a corporation is its like own like thing.
Yeah.
It's a train that can run without a conductor. Mm-hmm. Like we're in a car here. Like we need to be in it or for it to go. Mm-hmm. But a corporation is its own set thing. Like, and we had a gentleman in here, Bartow Elmore. He's an environmental historian from Ohio State. Fantastic guy.
Bartow Elmore. Okay.
He talked about Coca-Cola. He wrote 3 books, and Coca-Cola was a central theme in all 3 of them. And he's like, it's actually cool because I got the chance to talk to some of the execs at Coke. And he was talking about potentially removing refrigerated Coca-Cola from a lot of the places that they do business because it's a huge, it was a greenhouse gas emitter previous when they had old technology.
Yeah.
Now it's just good old carbon emissions. But he was like, did you ever like think of potentially, not refrigerating Coke at these sites? It just seems like that would be a lot easier.
Yeah.
And he's like, they'd never even considered it. They're like, nope, didn't even consider it. And he's like, oh, I get it. This is not like a business. This is a religion that Coca-Cola needs to be cold in every location. He's like, that's a corporation. Like that thing is unable to be changed from the way that it is.
That's really well said. You should totally post that on TikTok. A company, not a corporation. Yeah. I'm sort of half joking when I say that because I'm like, oh, that's actually like, that's one of those statements where like when Bruce Lee says, be like water. You're like, what the hell does that even mean? When you actually practice fighting and all that other movement stuff, like you begin to get a sense of what it means. You're like, oh, it's actually a doing. It's a practice, which is probably not different than like playing music. Like when you actually play music, like you're just adapting to everything around you while still playing bass. Right. So what you just said actually is kind of similarly awesome.
Yeah, thank you. I can't take total credit. Honestly, I don't. I would credit the individual that I first heard say it, but I don't recall who it was. But yeah, so I hear all these people like railing against, capitalism and these corporations and like you talked about the healthcare industry. I had a gentleman on the podcast, John Ziegler, and we talked for 2.5 hours about how the healthcare industry is not really a care industry. It's a sick injury. It's a sick care. Mm-hmm. Like, let's wait until you're sick and then we'll try to do something. And he was sort of proposing a new model where almost like insurance, a hospital system or whatever the medical system was, you would pay into them and then they would keep the money when you're healthy. Mm-hmm. And when you're sick, they don't get to keep the money. So it's like insurance, essentially. Like you pay into the insurance and then you use it. Sounds
like socialism.
Well, hopefully there's a system out there that they can still make some money. I do think there needs to be a profit incentive there, but I think that the incentive needs to be more aligned with, hey, when we keep Will healthy, like we keep more money, right? And I think at the current moment, it's, hey, when Will gets sick, we make more money. So it's like just a twisted incentive, right? Like, and I told it to John, I was like, hey, like, if I was a doctor mm-hmm. and I realized like the sicker you are, the more money I make, mm-hmm. it's like, you don't need to be an evil person to start to behave in a bad way, mm-hmm. When the incentives align in that particular way. So again, when it comes to like capitalism, corporations, and just, the economy in general, I don't think that there's like terrible actors out there across the board. I think that you're just seeing this system works in a certain way that it doesn't always prioritize the individual.
Because I agree with you about bad actors. There are bad actors, but not the majority. We see the reality reflected to us. We're actually making choices about what reality like we're going to look at, what we're not going to look at. And we're like, well, profit is profit. Like everyone's doing it. It's okay. It's just how we work. Without even like really questioning, well, what is profit and what's the purpose of it? Is it just an accumulation of like dollars in an account? And if so, what's the function of that? What's the purpose of that? Does it bring me happiness?
Yes.
Does it bring me well-being?
Yes.
Because this is kind of like, I don't know, the whole function to me of like, and I am not a wealthy person. I mean, relatively in American standards, but like the whole purpose for me having money is like well-being.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so like if I have somebody who pays me like $2.50 an hour, the really nice thing about that is I then get to help someone who's paying me like $5 an hour, even though they have like similar life experiences, like similar like abuse and similar like trauma and horror or whatever. So what's the purpose of me making what to me is like back in Ohio, like a little bit of an exorbitant amount, like $2.50 an hour, like that's a chunk of change.
Those are the legal fees right there.
Yeah, exactly right. There's illegal fees. That's well said. It allows me then to experience more well-being. If the function of a hospital is just the accumulation of dollars, you're now going to have a really, really flawed system. If the function of the profit is to spin it back into the hospital to increase the care for both providers and participants, which really even that should not be particularly separate, that's a radically different place. So, and I remember seeing this at, I worked for a nonprofit called the Center for Eating Disorders, which got bought out by the Emily program. It was Laura Hill's, and Laura's like a weird, awesome genius of treating people with anorexia, like extremely focused on that, really understood the neurobiology of it, had her own protocol, like, but it was also just ethically, she had this nonprofit she started, the Center for Eating Disorders, which I also liked because it didn't have a name like the Bella Vita or like, I don't know, Mars Volta. I know that's a band, but could be the name of an eating disorder center for all I know. Right. It's just real like eponymous. We are the Center for Eating Disorders. If you have an eating disorder, come here. I like that. But it was the most profitable nonprofit that I'd ever worked for because all the money that they would make would just get turned back into, we're going to treat our providers really well. We're going to make sure that they get vacation, they get good health care, they get taken care of. They need time off. They don't have to freak out about it. and we're going to increase what we can do with our patients. Oh, now we have a surplus like money at the end of the year. Let's actually start another group service with it. Like everyone's pretty covered. This stuff is covered. We're going to actually support either training or more services for patients, or let's bring in another doctor. We have like this 6-month wait list. Let's see if we can bring in another MD. To me, that really hit me at the time. I didn't realize how lucky I was because I was like pretty young. I was like, that's kind of how a system should work. So if our version of profit is merely accumulation of dollars, you're going to see that affect everyone participating.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you see that at the university level. We're seeing it at healthcare level. We're very much like our government seems for profit.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what dominates our government is most of the people who are running for office, not all. I mean, I think there's always outliers and weirdos. And I don't know why those people never get studied. They should be studied. Outliers and weirdos, right? Most of the people that even are running for office are people who wish to make a profit. Like they wish to have more power or more dollars. At least with the stupid text that I get of people saying like, you know, this person is a liar. My opponent's a liar, 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 and they're bad. I need money.
Yeah, right.
That's it. Like, I mean, back in the last federal election and last presidential election, the number of texts I was getting from like Joe freaking Biden's campaign, and I'm neither Democrat nor Republican, but it was never like, here's my platform. Here's what I believe in. Here's what I plan on doing and how I'm going to do it and when I'm going to do it. It was never that. It was like, we need to defeat the Republicans.
Yeah.
Give me money.
We need money to do it, buddy.
Yeah. So I just started texting them back because we were living in the hospital at the time and being like, hey, I'm broke. My kids got cancer. Give me money. Like, did you know that I need money? Like, can you? And after
support
about
my cause, dude.
Yeah, about 3 weeks of doing this, someone texted back like, can you please stop sending us unsolicited texts asking for money? And I was like, I find that really funny. They're probably not finding it really funny. But almost all of the advertising, almost all the political stuff that I get, they're like saying, give me money. Because it seems that that's the only way they're saying this is how we participate in a democracy. Who are you giving money to? Where are you spending?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of this is my platform. Technically, I'm a public servant. This is the service I wish to provide. Vote for me or don't.
Unfortunately, it seems like our system is not, and it's funny because it's the most available time in history for you to project your platform, like we talked about, via social media. Mm-hmm. But yet it seems almost impossible unless your campaign has significant funding behind it to get anywhere. Yeah. We actually have a presidential candidate coming on the podcast next week.
No shit.
Michael Rechtenwald. He's the Libertarian candidate. So
that poor dude is probably going to get no attention or support.
He'll get 1 to probably 5% of the vote, something like that.
Yeah.
There are better third-party candidates than ever, though.
Yes, that's true.
I mean, I think RFK Jr. is running as an independent. I don't think he's officially announced that, but he's announced that he's announcing something. Neither here nor there, but yeah, I mean, I'm just interested to talk to him. Like, what do you think it would take? I don't think he has any dreams of winning. I think he gets that, but I'm going to be very intrigued to see like what does he view as the steps to kind of fix this thing. I know I've heard you talk about big government and mind control and the messaging and things like that quite a bit. But I kind of want to close here with maybe some like action oriented advice for people who are listening, and maybe they've never considered therapy, or maybe they've thought about it, or maybe they've heard people say like, hey, you could use it, or maybe they're currently dealing with difficult times, situations, whether that be just, life's pretty good. I'm in the first world. I got all my life and limbs and appendages, but I'm just kind of not doing as well as I could. Or, far out into, bad things have happened in my life that I'm trying to work through. I mean, can you give us any game plans of where to go and where to begin for people to kind of work on this? It's not like a fixed, I've heard you say once before, like you don't fix it. Like that's all, I think anything, right? Like if you're bummed out today, you don't fix it and you go, I'm happy now. It's like, hey, it's a constant battle or a constant thing you work on, just like physical fitness is. But what are kind of your pieces of advice to people out there who might be looking for some help?
That's a big question. It's condensing. Okay. The first thing that I would say, the help you need depends entirely upon your specific conditions. Like, it's not generic. Nobody is generic.
Mm.
And I've totally had some of my people, clients, patients, people, whatever the term you want to use is, offer to hit me with a radiator if I say that one more time. Like, actions have effects. Like, you're not random. None of what you're experiencing is random. It's all has causality. Nobody is just fucked up.
Mm.
So even in looking at folks who had like committed horrible stuff, I used to also work with perpetrators, like way back in the day, like people who were like, full-fledged, deep into the psychopathic continuum, which is a very, very stable organization. Like, weirdly, psychopaths, boring, super boring. They don't really change. They don't really learn a lot. They can get better at doing the same thing, but their system is not good at learning or changing. That's just part of what defines psychopathy. Like, they don't really learn well from cause and effect. Anyhow, which is why recidivism is so high. But even with those guys, or those guys who did such awful and horrible extremes, you could actually begin to trace back the cause and effect of it. Like, where did this start? How did this start? What were the conditions? What choices did you make and not make? What things happened to you, and what did you choose to do with those things, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess the first thing for people who are looking for help is to know that your shit's not inherently just like fucked up. You're experiencing like conditions. There's cause and effect to it. Like, and conditions can change. The second is that while your actions do affect you, your mental actions, what you do with your brain, your mind, your body, your words, your attention, what you choose to do with those things have an effect on your emotions. But so do others around you. The people you are around, how people look at you or talk to you or listen to you or don't listen to you, that also affects you. So for some people, I'll use an example, and I'm trying not to be long-winded and tangential, and you can always tell me to wrap it up. When I had an office in Santa Monica, and Santa Monica is fancy for a lot of people there. Anyway, this guy comes in. He was like a hedge fund guy. He like oodles of dough guy. He's like somewhere in his 50s or something. And he comes in, and he's got the nice linen pants. And I actually really liked this dude. He was weirdly, really sweet. And like kind of like that pseudo hippie hedge fund kind of thing you get in Santa Monica. And he says, well, I'm here because I have untreatable depression. My analyst has told me there's nothing to do. Like, so I'm just here because I figure I'd try to do something different in therapy. And I understand that you're unorthodox, which is pretty true. And he's telling me like, oh, my depression, it feels like this and just feels kind of like numb oftentimes and just, I can't feel blah, blah, blah. I'm like, when did this start? And he was very clear. He's like, oh, about 10 years ago. And then I was like, when did you start cheating on your wife? And he perked right up. He was like, about 10 years ago. And I was like, so how does that affect you? And he starts explaining his whole situation. He has this woman that he actually really cares about. He really loves. And he has her in an apartment on the other side of the bay. And he has family on the side of the bay. So what do you think it did to him when he would be living this one life, having sex with this woman, having dinner, and then he comes home and looks his wife in the face and says, hi, honey, how are you? He was affecting himself. So when I say like it's your environment, I don't just mean as in like for everyone around you to be meeting your own needs. For some people, if they have a lot of difficulty listening to others, it makes them feel lonely. The same way, if no one's listening to me, I feel lonely. So loneliness in this particular case can have multiple etiologies. I would say connection. Like being around people who can actually see and acknowledge your reality without it negating theirs. Who you can see their reality without it negating yours. That to me is sort of the basis, the beginning of feeling okay. And for people of more extreme realities that are not recognized in society as a whole, like most of the folks that I work with, I mean, like, despite the fact that it's well recognized that child pornography is literally an industry in this country, how many people came forward during the Me Too movement and was like, I was used to child pornography? None. No one that I'm aware of. Even though we know that there's a shit ton of people who were.
Mm-hmm.
So you have all these people who are living a life where their actual reality, the reality of their life, which is a pretty extreme fucking reality, completely denied, unrecognized, unacknowledged. Like people want to run around and say like, stop child trafficking. Well, that person who just walked into your office with the untreatable depression, she's one of them. So when I say like being able to hear another person's realities, not negating yours, like a person who says like, well, I've experienced a crap ton of racism in my life. They're not calling you bad. They're saying this is a reality that I've experienced. I've been discriminated against. That doesn't mean you have to say, well, like not all men are bad. Or like, well, not all white people are bad, or not all these people are bad, or like, not the ability to see another person's reality without losing your own. That's, if your therapist ain't doing that, get a different therapist.
Mm.
If your friends aren't doing that, they're not really performing the function of a friend. If your family doesn't do that, it's not really engaging as a family. If your online community isn't doing that, if it's just a lot of people shouting into echo chambers, you're going to feel bad.
Mm.
I think that more than anything else would be the basis of, or your religious community, whether it's Christian or Buddhist or whatever. And I've seen all of these things happen in a Buddhist community as well as like in a Catholic community, like denial of reality.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that would be the beginning basis of wellness in the current absolute bananas of our society.
Connection.
Yeah. The ability to acknowledge another person's reality without losing your own.
I love it. What about movement? Because before you got in here, walked in here, you were squatting, you're bending over, you're taking your shin bone to your hip.
Yeah, you got a body. Like your body is like a dog's body. Like your mind is just riding the horse. Like your body's a horse. And I've ridden a lot of horses, but when I've ridden a horse before, I'm like, oh, this horse is really in charge. My job is to trick the horse that I'm in control.
Yeah.
But at any point in time, the horse could be like, oh, fuck you, buddy, and I'm gone. So with taking care of your body, bodies are meant to be relational. It's like even when you study all the different movements that, and I don't know if do you have kids?
No.
Oh, okay. So what are the neat things about kids? You can watch all of this stuff happen. When a baby's born, they could barely reach. But as they're learning to reach, reaching is relational. They're actually reaching to grasp and hold and connect. The push, that's relational. Almost all of human movement is actually meant to be relational to our environment and to each other. So I actually like yoga. Yoga's nice. I do very little yoga because yoga is how you connect to your body. I like martial arts, and I really hate violence. Super hate violence. But I started doing martial arts because I want to understand it and not be scared of it. And I want to be able to be happy and calm in the middle of it. But one of the cool things about doing martial arts, about fighting, it's all relational. I'm having a conversation with you. I remember there's some dude that I was like gonna refer one of my people to because he's a body worker. And I was like, I'd like to get to know you first because this kid has got some really weird stuff. Like it's working with his body is going to be strange. And he said, why don't we just meet at the park and spar? And I was like, I like you. And he was so much fun to spar. He had so much control. He was so precise, but he was funny. So he told me the truth about him just through movement because it's relational, which is actually not different than music. Music, the whole function of music, it's relational. If you really want to know someone and you play music with them, So much better than talking. So with bodies, I would say use your body to relate to others in your environment. When you exercise, instead of exercising so you could see your reflection as being a sculpted bro or a lady with a good booty or I don't know, whatever. Think about how your body relates to others in your environment. What do you want to do with it? A little less, how does it look? But a little more like, what do you want to use it for? That's what I would say about using your body.
I love it. Will Randle, where can people find you if they want to connect or check out any of the other stuff you do? I know you got a website.
I would say almost kind of don't. And I totally mean no offense to this. I currently work in probably about 55, sometimes 60 hours a week. I'm a little overwhelmed with contact. And if anyone's listening to this that I have not responded to, so sorry. But I get probably like 5 to 6 people a week who are like reaching out. Can I work with you? Can I do this? And I just lose track.
Yeah.
So as far as direct care goes, I'm a little oversaturated, actually a lot oversaturated. I do apologize for that. I wish I could see more people. My concentration and family can't really tolerate it.
Mm-hmm.
You can find me at will@willrandle.com because I lived in LA. You have to have a personal website. It's almost like when you arrive in LA, they're like, here's your yoga pants, here's your website. Yeah, I'm open for doing consultation, supervision, training, and stuff like that. But direct care, I am
tapped out.
Yeah, just the people I'm with right now, still working it. So, but if you want to, that's a place you could find me or find evidence that I exist digitally.
Cool. All right, Will Randle, I really appreciate you coming on, man.
Oh, thank you so much for asking me.
This information
is super
is I'm going to have to digest and think about some of the things that you said.
You said a company, not a corporation. I'm taking that.
All right, man. I'm glad you found some value too.
Oh, that's super good. Yeah, it did.
All right, brother. Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much.